So this morning, I just want to focus on three areas of our scriptures. The first one is King Cyrus. The second one is gratitude. And then the last one is reflecting the image of God. So first, King Cyrus. A little history. So King Cyrus not only was not Jewish, but King Cyrus was Persian. And King Cyrus was a king at a time when the Israelites were in the Babylonian exile. So the Babylonian Empire had come into Israel. They had taken everyone captive and brought them back to Babylon, and they were remaining in Babylon for decades. And they kept wondering, when is God going to free us? And how is God going to free us from this captivity? And so in our first reading today, King Cyrus is the one that's being spoken about because he becomes the king of Persia, and the Persian Empire eventually comes in and overtakes the Babylonian Empire and frees the Israelites to return to their homeland, and King Cyrus pays to rebuild their temple. Now that's pretty amazing in itself, but what it shows us is that God works through all things. God works even through a foreign king who brings the Israelites back to their homeland. And the wonderful phrase in the first reading is being addressed to King Cyrus, that God is using him and doing all these things through him, even though you knew me not. It's repeated twice, even though you knew me not. And I think that's a good reminder to us that sometimes we are like King Cyrus, even though we're going about our daily routines, and sometimes we go about our daily routines almost like atheists. We act and do the things of our daily routine without any awareness of what God is doing in us, even though you knew me not. And yet, we know and we believe that God is always at work in our lives, that God is always acting, and not just acting, but using us as a critical element of bringing his plan of salvation forward. So how do we recognize that more readily? How do we pay attention to that? Well, there were these two friends. One was from New York, and one was from an Indian reservation, a Native American reservation out in Wyoming. And they had been friends for many years, and so the one from Wyoming came to New York City to visit his friend. And as they're walking down the street in New York City, the Native American said to his friend, "Do you hear that cricket?" And his friend looked at him and he said, "It's New York City. Are you telling me you can hear a cricket? Are you trying to pull one of your Native American tricks on me?" And he said, No, watch." And so he bent down and he looked, and sure enough, he found a cricket in a little crack in the sidewalk, and he picked him up and showed him to his friend. And his friend was really impressed, and he said, "Now, watch this." And so the Native American reached into his pocket and pulled out about 4 coins, and he threw them on the sidewalk until they made noise, and everybody walking by stopped and looked at the coins. And when they realized they were just nickels, they kept going. But he looked at his friend and he said, it's just a matter of what you're listening for. So tuning ourselves to listen and to look for where God is at work is just a matter of setting our hearts on the right thing. And that's where gratitude comes in. I want you to think about the last week. Go back through the last 7 days and try and imagine 5 things that you want to thank the Lord for. 5 things that have happened in your week that you would like to be able to acknowledge and say thank you to God. Maybe you already have, but when we do that on a regular basis, that's where we begin to see where God is at work. When we go back and look at the things that happened in our week, the things that we couldn't have planned for, the things that we couldn't have made happen on our own, the things that were blessings to us, that's a sign of where God is at work. And if we do that on a regular basis and look for those moments of gratitude on a regular basis, we start to become more attuned to what God is doing in us, how God is using us and acting in our lives in order to bring his plan of salvation forward. And that's what leads us to the gospel. You see, in the gospel reading, the Pharisees and the Herodians are trying to trap Jesus. The Herodians were supporters of the Roman Empire. The Pharisees hated it. The Herodians were fine with paying taxes. The Pharisees hated it. And so they tried to set Jesus up because no matter which way he answered, he would be in trouble. Either the people would hate him because he was supporting the Roman occupation, or the Romans would arrest him because he's opposing Caesar's tax. And so it was a no-win proposition. And yet Jesus outsmarted them. Instead of focusing on the issue of taxes, he focused on the issue of image. And when he asked them about the coin and whose image it was, of course the coin had Caesar's face on the front of the coin. But then he challenges them about their own image. And that takes us back to the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created man and woman. In his image and likeness, he created them. And because we bear the image and likeness of God, that's part of our vocation as Christians, is to reflect that image of God to the world so that the world sees in us something of God's goodness, something of God's mercy, something of God's compassion. That's why when we look at how we're spending our lives, we should look first at whether or not the way we're spending our lives is reflecting that image to the world. We call that stewardship. And that doesn't just mean money. It means, am I using the gifts? Am I using the abilities and time that God has given to me in order to show the world what God's love looks like in a concrete human life? That's what the saints did. The saints of the church are held up not because of their perfection, but because they became so transparent that God shone through them. And so this weekend, I want you to take some time, try to go back through your last week and imagine God acting in your life just as he did in the life of King Cyrus. Where are those moments of gratitude that point to that action of God? And how do you allow that to become part of the rhythm and pattern of your life so that your life is more and more reflecting the beauty of God's love into the world?